$0 to $2,500, the financial cost of adopting a child through the foster care system. I'm your host, Marcy Bursack, and I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to find more forever families. After blogging my journey adopting a pair of siblings, I realized I knew countless people who had the desire to adopt, but believed it was too expensive. So I wrote the Forgotten Adoption Option, a self-reflection and how-to guide for pursuing foster care adoption. And I started this podcast. I am very delighted that you're tuning in. In Season 2, I'm dropping monthly episodes to teach you how to adopt U.S. children who are waiting for you in the foster care system. You might also enjoy the personal stories of adoptive parents and adopted children that I featured in Season 1. Now, whether now feels like the right time, the process feels overwhelming, or someone quickly comes to mind to share this with, I am here for you. I am America's foster care adoption mentor, and I am eager to help you fulfill a child's dream of having a forever family. Welcome to the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast. In this episode, I'm very excited because you're going to learn how to verbalize and process fears that pop up when considering who are in foster care. In fact, I broached this topic in my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option, with a whole section on the different fears and the perspective of parents and children. And so today, I'm joined by Mom, Joy Gilraine. Hi, Joy.
Hi, Marcy.
I am so excited for you to share this wealth of experience that you bring to the table. Joy and I were introduced through fellow adoptive mom and author Brenda Jank. Thank you, Brenda, for introducing us. After adopting a child through foster care herself, Joy has been teaching current and prospective adoptive families how to own their foster care fears and explore them without judgment. And I just want to invite our listeners that this episode is meant to just help you unpack things and to invite you to consider things. So with that, Joy, so you and your husband, you had biological children, and then you adopted your son. How old were your children when you adopted, and what led you and your husband to adopt specifically through foster care?
Well, we have 5 biological children, and our children at that time were 19, 18, 11, 9, and 4. And I had always wanted to pursue adoption, and my husband had not wanted to pursue adoption. And it had been a discussion over the years. And a friend of mine was a foster parent, and her sister was also a foster parent, and she was fostering a little boy who ended up being on the waiting list. And we were having dinner one night. Our friends that we'd been together with them, and my son, who was 9 at the time, said, "Boy, we really got to pray for Ben. That kid's about to be an orphan." And I don't know what he thought that meant, but somehow the other kids had communicated to him that Ben was going to be without having an actual family of his own. And that started for us the real foray into adopting a child who was waiting for a family already.
And so were you all like licensed at this time, or you just kind of went through the process?
Yeah, we were not licensed at the time. It just led us to then the licensing process in order to pursue being able to adopt Ben.
It's so interesting because there might be people listening going, well, okay, that makes sense because you were already fostering, but no, you weren't at all. Like you just heard of someone and felt your heart called to do something about that. And your kids, it sounds like they kind of convinced you all.
Yeah, it was really, I always love that story. On the hard days, I remember that, like that my son was the first one to catch the vision of who was next for our family. So yeah,
that's so good on the hard days. Yeah, because we have to remember, so much more when we're parenting. And so as we broach the topic of adopting through foster care, which for some can be met with a mixture of reactions in a 2-person relationship, especially. I know for my husband, who was on the very first episode of this podcast, he shared about his fear related to foster care adoption. He was like, I don't want to lose my personal time, like not to be selfish, but to be selfish, right? Like that was real for him. And I had fears of things like, what if, like, well, what if the child does this, or what if there's this challenge, or what if there's that? And I remember my husband being like, Marcy, this is true for biological children. Like your what ifs aren't any different, but there were these reservations in our minds. And so I'm curious, what kinds of fears have you personally faced along your family's foster care adoption journey?
Right. I think, one of the fears having biological children of varied ages at the time, one of my fears was, how will this affect all of my kids? Everyone's at such a different age where they still need things from me as a parent, how will taking on a child that I really don't know and then I don't know what the needs are going to be, how will that affect meeting the needs of my um the kids I was already currently taking care of? That was a fear of mine personally. Another fear was, what if I can't do what it's going to take? What if he has a challenge I'm not going to be able to meet, because they weren't really certain at the time what his physical challenges would be. And so that was an honest fear of mine, which, kind of to your husband's point, those are sometimes fears we have when we're pregnant or as our kids grow or we start to see other things come into play. But it feels different when you're going to be making this choice
It's
to,
elective. Yeah.
yes, it's like, I have to, go into these fears and questions. And so those were two of my big ones at the beginning. And then what if the system just makes it too hard? Because that's how everybody refers to it, quote unquote, the system. What if I go to do this and it's just too difficult of a process to finish it? That was a fear I had. How would it look to work through the system to adopt a child from foster care? So those were some of my initial fears.
And they're real, right? And I wonder,
Yeah.
kind of just digging a little bit deeper on that as I'm thinking through even like my own path and your own experience, and thinking, why did we go through that, right? Like sometimes fears can inhibit us and they can kind of paralyze us from doing more, right? Like I know sometimes people do start the licensing process and then there's a fear or the system is challenging to deal with, and so they just stop.
Right.
So I'm curious, like if you think about your own story, why do you think you worked through those fears, talked about those fears, and have addressed them? Like what do you think made you do that?
Right. I think that honestly, having the end result, the motivation that the end result was going to be bringing this child into our family who really was waiting for like the waiting word that you use is just not dramatic or to be really, they don't even know they're waiting for a family, but everyone is. And that motivation kept me really wanting to go through my fears and say, well, what if I get to a point when the system becomes too difficult, I'll figure out what to do then, and there were times during it where it was, well, I already filled out that form, or I already and then they give you the form of what are all the things you're willing to accept and do. And you're like, wow, that is a list. I don't know how to check those boxes so in a calculated way when you're talking about kids. It's such a practical yet emotional process that those two pieces coming together can be hard. But I think that motivation of the end of like, there is a child waiting and we're ready to bring him into the family, whether we know 100% what that's going to look like. So I want to work through these things. And I think that's important when we really look at our fears as they come up, we can start to say, I want to work through them, not, well, that's too big for me to work through, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds like you saw, and I think I can relate to that as well. Like I knew what I was trying to do. I knew who I was trying to help. I didn't know like the who exactly, but I knew that, that I was trying to help children. And so it's kind of like, well, if this is the process, I kind of have to go through the process. But you mentioned something I want our listeners to have a little more light on too, in terms of what are you willing to accept? So every state's a little different, but essentially there's this form that once you're going through the foster care adoption licensing process in Missouri, for me, it was like a 2-page double-sided, it's like 4 total pages. And it was like an Excel spreadsheet on it where it would list equality. Like, what if the child has a history of hurting pets? Or what if the child is blind? And it had all of these different qualities. And we had choice of like willing to discuss, maybe, and absolutely no. Like there was, and you kind of had to pick it. My husband and I had never really talked through all of the different varieties of things kids might need. And so for us, it was a huge discussion point. Did you have a similar experience when you're like, hello, never thought about all of these attributes?
Yes, 100%. We definitely were like, wow, I didn't even know some of those things like I guess I didn't know to think about them coming along with this package. And so it was a really good point. And it was hard because you were like, well, I don't really want to say that I'll exclude somebody with something, but it did really help us to firm up past our fears and past our wants and desires to bring a child. And it did help us go, well, what is our family actually able, if we're going to be knowing some of this ahead? We won't know everything, but there were some things when our house wasn't ready, example, for somebody in a wheelchair that would have not been accessible. So that was like, okay, so we can work through some of those no's, knowing that we're just not ready. But it very good conversation points between us.
Yeah, but it's great that I think that's we share that going through that even made us kind of question, like, I don't want to be mean, but at the same time, we got to
Yes.
be realistic. And so just so listeners know, like, this is okay. It's just part of the process. And
Right.
it's okay to have preferences, and it's okay to not be able to do some things. Like, that's part of
Exactly.
how it works. So, Joy, as we were preparing for the episode, you had shared with me that oftentimes, kind of building off what we just talked about, people can feel ashamed to
Mhm.
share their reservations and fears, and whether those are being shared with like their significant other or friends or family, but it can kind of make us not want to talk about why we're afraid of adopting children in foster care. So, what kinds of fears are you hearing people apologize for having? And maybe can you help us as listeners know we're feeling ashamed of that? Like, what can we do about that?
Right. So I think, when I'm speaking with people who are preparing to adopt, one of the fears that people don't want to say out loud is, I'm afraid I can't love this child as much as I love a biological child, because there's something that feels selfish or mean or not compassionate, whatever the right wording is. There is just something that makes people feel ashamed. But a lot of people have that fear, and they're afraid to say it. Or if their spouse or partner is admitting to that fear, it's very hard to listen to, because I think when you're going into this, it is so emotional that the fears tap into the fear of the process stopping. If you have this
Mm-hmm.
desire for it, and then the person who has to do this with you has this big fear that you can't really make go away, then it feels very vulnerable to say, well, what if that ends up stopping the process of this thing I want? But I really encourage people that one of the things my husband asked me, what was really insightful on his part when we were going through it, was, can you let me process this in my way? Can you let me bond in my way and not compare it to how you are? Because for a lot of us as moms and women, bonding is more natural in certain ways. And he was afraid I was going to compare how he was handling the process to how I was handling the process. And the person we were working with through our licensing agency said, wow, that is actually really wise, because that does happen. We put the expectations on to our significant other, whoever's partnering with us in the adoption, and they can become such a point of contention between us, because we are all going to have our own process. So that fear of, will I not do the process not just well enough for the child, will I not do it well enough for my spouse? Am I going to be on the judgment seat all the time for not doing something that they want me to do? I think was a really something that people are afraid of too. I'm afraid to tell my wife I have this fear, because she's going to be mad at me because she wants to do this. But the
Hmm.
fear doesn't have to be a stopping point. And I think that was the point we came away with in our first conversation too. The fear is just something, when we get it out and we can look at it and we can let people speak into it, we can usually identify a little bit with it in ourselves even. It helps us look at something in ourselves, and then helps us be able to help someone else work through the process of looking at that fear. Whether we can come to a resolution for it or not, we can at least honor it by hearing it, by giving them the space to have it, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Well, what do you think? Because I'm wondering, I think absolutely like being able to give someone the space to say it. But I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this too, we're listening, but like our facial expressions and our
Oh yeah.
reactions do not meet them where they are. Do you have any tips or practices of like what can we do to really get in the right mind and heart set to be ready to give our significant other, to
Yeah.
give our biological, to give people space to process?
Right. I think that just what you said is important. It will hardly ever happen well in a spontaneous conversation, because
Mm,
we'll almost always respond out of our own feelings and fears, because that's what people do. We're all our feelings and our fears, good and bad, together, and that prompts our responses. So I think it's really important to be intentional and to say, I want to hear this, so I'm going to listen all the way through before I respond. And I'm going to try to hold in, like you said, because we can speak much louder actually without words than we can with words. It's easy to just say, okay, I hear you, but everything in our countenance is suggesting otherwise. I hear you, but I don't accept what you're saying. I don't want to hear you. And so I think it's important to set those times intentionally, so that you yourself can prepare to listen all the way through. And then also to ask the other person to give you that same grace back. Can I, once they're done, it's not about bringing up the best and well played argument. It's about saying, I understand that. And I think one of the hardest parts and the most fearful parts about it is we might have to say, I do not have any idea if that will or won't happen. I don't know. My husband had deep, deep fears about what if the child resents us at some point? What if they wish that we didn't adopt them? Not us necessarily specifically, but what if? What if we do this and then they hate us? That was a fear he had in verbalized. Well, I mean, Ben was 2 years old. I couldn't, at the time, he was nonverbal. I really couldn't say that will never happen. It does happen. So I couldn't say it wouldn't happen. I could say, just like everything else in life, I guess if that happens, then we'll have to decide the best way and the most loving way to deal with it. But I can't tell you it's not a legitimate fear. And at the same time, I can tell you, I don't think it's the only end result. I don't think fear is what we should base our decisions on in any part of our life. So it transfers through to that. But I had to be willing to listen. And at first I wasn't good about that. I wanted to just defend and convince him that all of his fears were just excuses, and they weren't. They were real fears. And once I was able to say, I hear you. I don't have an answer for that. I can't have an answer for that. But we can know that, again, like your husband said, those are some of the same fears we all have with any relationship. So that helped us, though, to be intentional, to determine that we were going to listen and then respond after we had listened.
Such good advice there. And I think if nothing else, listeners, I'm hoping that you hear you're very, very, very normal to have fear in this space.
Yeah.
In fact, I still have fear in the middle of raising kids in this space. And I think that's just kind of part of it's parenting, but part of it's just the nuances of what comes to the complexities of adoption. But kind of switching topics just a little bit, in my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option, which is written for adults to kind of navigate the process, I share a whole host of fears, and some are things like being too old or having to wait a long time. And they're fears that are shared by both the adoptive parents and the children being adopted, because it can be a worry, right? Like, what if I'm not getting adopted because of this? And another fear that's shared is the fear of becoming emotionally connected to another person, right? Like, what if I put my heart out there and it's not met with the same sort of desire? And so I'm curious, what advice do you share for people that are afraid of developing a relationship, like bonding with them with a child or sibling group that they're adopting through foster care?
Right. And I think that is probably the most primal fear that we have in the whole thing. It's less practical and less based on something tangible that we can do, and more based on all of us want to protect ourselves innately. That's our desire, to protect our hearts. And so when kids are coming from these traumatic backgrounds, it can be trauma, just meaning if you're in the situation where you need to be adopted, you have had some sort of trauma, whether it's, physical trauma or not. You have had a break in one of the most significant relationships we have in life, is a parental relationship. And so they come innately with that fear of connecting. They don't even know it, but they have that fear. They're longing to connect, but the fear of being rejected if they connect again. And it's very easy as an adoptive or foster parent to react to that fear by also protecting yourself, because you can feel a child like they are giving you affection and they're soaking up your attention, but they have some reservation because of their fears. I have said to people, for a while, I feel like I developed reactive attachment to my child's reactive attachment. Like, it's really hard to keep putting yourself all the way in. But I think, again, it's when we can express that to someone and say, I'm really afraid because it feels like they're rejecting me and I'm giving them everything I know to give. But then I can feel like I'm holding back some because the rejection hurts, whether you can see the reasons why or not. It still hurts. But I think when we find someone, it may or may not be able to be the person in this process with us. Sometimes that's too much for the other person who's also going through it. But if you can find someone to say, this is really deep. I'm afraid to give my whole heart, because what if they never accept it? What if they, throw it back and I get hurt? What if something happens in the process and they take the kids back, or it doesn't work out? Those are legitimate and real fears. But I think, again, that intention and the very purposeful thing of, I can't control any of this except I can control that I'm going to stay open. I'm going to get hurt, whether it's intentional or not, but I'm going to stay open in response to that. And like I said, I'm being honest, I went through a period where I said that to myself, but I didn't necessarily know how to make that happen because I was hurt. We went through a really hard attachment time after we moved to another state, and it kind of disrupted everything and threw a bunch of things into play. But I think that acknowledging it and saying, I'm not wrong. And like you just said earlier, I'm not alone in this fear. Most adoptive moms and dads and siblings and the kids that are being adopted, like you said, most of us will have some component of that fear along the process. And I think that just remembering that and saying, I can work through it. I think maybe one of the best pieces of insight I had during our initial adoption and my husband's fear was, what if I can't love this child as much as I love my biological kids? I love them so much. I can't imagine how I'll be able to just do that for someone else that didn't come from me or whatever. And I think one of the biggest pieces of insight I was grateful to get was it doesn't have to be the same. It isn't a comparison. It has to be what that child needs. We have to be willing to give what they need in that relationship. So comparing it can take away some of that fear too. We won't feel the same because I don't even feel the same about any of my 5 biological kids. I love all of them. I would do anything for all of them. But in terms of my feelings, what it takes to love each of them individually is different because they're individuals. And that's the same for the adopted child. I can't go back and give birth to Ben. I didn't. So that's a missing link for me that I had to face. Like when people would ask stories about his birth, I don't know. I don't know that. But I think when we can find someone and say, you're not alone. Everyone has these fears that we're not going to connect, or if we do, we're going to get hurt. But in facing the fears, we actually can find a deeper connection because we're kind of in it together. We're in it, all of us that are afraid of it are kind of in it together in our family unit. So if we face it, it can actually be a bond instead of a bond breaker, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's such a good perspective. I think there's a lot of just like nuggets there. I can imagine people like, I'm gonna bookmark this episode and listen to it again because this is real. It's what happens. And so a couple questions before we wrap up. I know that one thing that you're passionate about as well is educating others on the heart of adopted children and how to parent in a way that allows children to process their own adoption stories safely and freely. Can you share some of that? Because I love this space of just letting kids have space.
Right. Yeah, sure. I think that that's one of the things too, that people kind of prepared me to be the bearer of the weight of their adoptive story. And at some point I realized, wait, I actually have to give that to them. And at first that terrified me. That was a really big fear. Why would I put this on, a child that I love now, that's my child now? Like, how am I going to ever pass this on in a way that won't hurt them? It really, I went through a really like brutal stage when he was becoming aware, and I started realizing like, oh, he's not going to be nonverbal in 3 forever. He's going to have questions, and I don't have good answers. I don't have answers I like. I don't have answers that I want a child to have to consider. Well, he didn't have to have those answers at 4, but he was going to have to be allowed to ask those questions. And I think those questions prompt a lot of the deepest fears in the adoptive process because they can make us feel like, well, so what? I'm not enough. I mean, I've had a lot of moms when it comes right down to it, after talking a few times, the innate fear is, well, why aren't we enough? Why aren't they glad to be with us instead of wondering what this other family could be like? Like, we love them. We are giving to them. We're fantastic. And that's all true, but it's not a competition. They have to come to grips with that. We come to grips with it in a different way by choice, but the adopted child's never had any choice in the matter. They've never had any choice. And so I think giving them the opportunity, I like to say it like this. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I want to give them room to ask questions. I don't want to say, I bet your question is, why'd your mom give you up? Like, I don't want to put that words in his mouth, but I want to make sure that as he starts to process being adopted, that I'm willing to look at that question. And even if the answer is, boy, this is really hard, Ben. We've had this discussion this year. And I mean, it could make me tear up now because it was really hard to say, your mom didn't do what they asked. She didn't do what they asked her to do. And he had a moment of awakening, which was, but that'd be like if you told me what to do to keep my favorite thing and I didn't do it. And I said, You're right. And I think the hardest space in the whole adoptive process is realizing we are not the ones that will heal or resolve the hurt, but we get a privilege. It feels like a burden often, but we really get the privilege of handling that with them and just saying, I'm sorry that this is a big thing to understand, because I've never had to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had to understand it, but I'm really sorry, but I know that we can look at this together. And Ben has asked all sorts of questions. He was acting out when we realized he needed the space to ask the questions. And he asked things, was my mom Chinese? And we were like, what? Well, you're not Chinese, but we realized most of the adopted children he knew were from China at the time.
Ah.
So he didn't say, I have an adoption question, Mom, but he had the space to start asking about her. What was her name? Did she give me my name? Questions that I could have waited to give him at some point in a big wrapped up box without answers, or try to avoid the question because of not wanting to talk about it. But it is his story. It is a part of his story. And I have, when I chose to look at it as a privilege instead of a burden, instead of with resentment towards the system or towards his biological parents, and looking at it as, I want to give that to him the best way I can. And that doesn't mean sugarcoating it. And it doesn't mean changing it. And it doesn't mean avoiding it. It means letting him ask and then helping him understand what it means. So when he's really angry, which is a lot of, adopted kids, and they don't know why they're angry, they have this innate, anger inside of them. I'm able to say now, I won't always be able to handle all of that. And that isn't my position. But Ben, why do you think you feel so angry? He doesn't say, I think it's because I'm adopted, but he has said at a thing I was teaching with kids, we're talking about things being unfair. Well, some of the kids, the most unfair thing that ever happened to them was, well, my brother got 2 cookies last night and I only got 1. But we're in the middle of this discussion, small group of kids, they're, 9 years old. And Ben says, I think it's unfair to be adopted. And I said, well, Ben, you know what? It is unfair that it doesn't happen to everybody and you didn't get to choose it. And then we went on with the discussion. He didn't continue it. And afterwards, there was another adoptive mom there and she said, wow, like, I don't feel like that. That makes me defensive. I said, like, well, but we love you so much and we're glad you're in the family. And I said, I'm not going to tell you how to handle or respond to your things. And that's okay. No judgment. But if you think about it, it's not wrong to say, it is unfair. It doesn't happen to everyone. Everyone won't have to feel this way. And so I think giving them that space, and then we get to give them tools. How's he going to handle his impulsiveness? That can't always be on me. At 25, it won't be able to be on me.
Right.
At 17, it won't. So I think looking at it as a privilege, not a burden, and not something that can't be addressed together. So I want to give him tools and give him his story in ways that he can then use it towards himself instead of against himself. I don't want to victimize him by his own story.
Right. Well, because there's so much, and I'm just thinking through my own family experience that to me, to your point, it's a privilege, but part of that is just the mindset. I know for myself of, okay, what kind of space am I in that can we talk about these things? And it's been really important to me because I've heard and know in my own family kind of stories of secretive adoption, right? Like where someone didn't know that they had a different parent or two, and then it one day came out and it was like a spiraling effect. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that because that seems like that's traumatizing, and I don't want to create more of that. And so it's like already going through foster care is enough. And so I know for our family, we have what we call family conversations, and we always tell our kids, like, it's always safe to ask the people in our family that live in our home anything you'd like to ask, and it's safe. We won't judge you. I can't promise that for the rest of the world, right? Like one day when you're in social media, not sure that's the right space for it, but this is always a safe space. But we've also come to this mutual agreement. My kids are currently 10 and 11, or 10 and 12, actually. Sorry, there's some birthdays in there. But we have kind of an agreement where sometimes the questions they ask, they're not details that my husband and I feel are healthy to tell them. And so sometimes my response is, I know the answer to your question, but I'm choosing to not answer it right now.
Yep.
And then I follow up, I guess they've gotten older. I've said, if you disagree with that, I'm wholly open to hearing your side of the story. But sometimes I think the details aren't for now. And they have yet to challenge it. I'm expecting that in the future they will. because some of the details, it's just like, that's not relevant right now. I don't want you to get stuck in some of that right now. But I think it's healthy, right? It's healthy as kids are getting older. And you kind of alluded to this, that as they age, like there's different things that are appropriate. But I really encourage people, whether you're in the middle of an adoptive family or thinking about a future one, like just making that a regular, normal thing. Like it's normal to talk about your past family. It's normal to talk about the fact that you're adopted. Like there's so much healing in that. And it's led my kids to like do projects at school that talk about foster care, adoption, and to do some creative assignments. And it's been neat because I'm like, they're not embarrassed by it. They're quite proud, you know, they're like, there are more kids like me, and we need more of us to speak up and to shine in our country.
Exactly. And I think that, like what you said, that was something that one of the people, when we did our adoption training, there were all different kinds of people in the group, and one of the couples was in the situation. It was kind of a secret adoption, and the guy was just broken up. He was like, oh, now I just don't know how this is not gonna, like, she's gonna have to know, and she's older now, and we did it out of love. We didn't do it out of, but she's gonna have to know. And what the woman said has really resonated with me, which is, what you've always known but don't fully understand is much easier than something you didn't know that changes everything you thought you understood. And it's like, what you're saying is exactly it. It's not something that we can't make them not adopted. Adopted isn't bad. It's not something to want to make someone not. And so when, like, what you're saying is just so spot on, when we can just say, like, that's okay. You do have another story that isn't ours. Ben has a biological sibling that he fortunately gets to still keep some connection with. And when he says to people like, I'm the only one in my family that has a little sister, everybody else only has big sisters, it's like, right on. That's exciting for him. That doesn't take away from us, So I think that it's he can own it as a way that makes him unique, but not left out. And I think that's always people's fear, that saying you're adopted will somehow make the person feel left out, not as valued. But when we face the fears and we look at the differences and we just go ahead and embrace it all together, I think it's such a bigger circle of including it.
Ooh.
That's
so good. You're like making me think. My children have an adopt t-shirt that was part of a photo shoot that I did as part of the People's Choice Award and so on with the pageant system that I'm in. And what's so beautiful is, so proud to wear the shirt to school. Like I think I see it cycle like on the weekly, and it's so great. And then at dinner sometimes I'll hear these beautiful stories like, hey mom, so and so at school, it's also adopted. When I wear this shirt, he gives me a thumbs up. Like it's just the cutest thing, because like it's building an inclusion of like, I know, I know my story, and someone else can relate to me because they also have a similar kind of story. So that's so great, Joy. So as we wrap up, I'm thinking, okay, what's something that you would leave with our listeners? So let's say someone's listening and they're like, okay, I heard all this. It sounds fantastic. Yes, I have fears. I do need to process them and talk to them. I have no clue how to broach this topic with my significant other. I have no idea how to set the stage, how to make it a healthy conversation instead of one that might cause an argument or someone feeling bad. What encouragement can you offer?
I think because that is so common, that one person is more passionate and they really want to bring the other person along into that passion. And thank goodness that happens, because there is a world of waiting children, But I think like one thing to say is, can we have a conversation, not a debate? I promise I will not try to argue every point you have. Can we have a conversation that can you at least be open to hearing what I'm saying? I won't ask you for a decision today. I won't press or guilt or try to, go around the bush every day with little hints that aren't so secretive about you doing this or us doing it. But could we just really have a conversation and start to look at if this could be for us? Because it's really on my heart. And I think when we are honest with the people we love about why we want to do it, and say, can you hear me out, and I'll hear you out, and let's start a conversation. And because it always just comes down to intention. And that doesn't mean manipulation. It doesn't mean presenting your best package, but saying, I know that like your probably first answer might be, that's crazy. That was my husband's first answer. And 10 years later, we have a child we've had for 10 years. But I think when you can say, could we just start the conversation? Could we listen to each other? I'll listen to you and you can listen to me too. And we don't have to argue each other out of if we're at a different place to start. And actually we ended up coming along at a really good unified place. And along the way, as we've had hard times, I've been so glad that one of us didn't drag the other towards it or away from it, that we're not the same about it. And that's not what I'm saying, but we were on the same page about it. And so it, because, in a lot of families, if we're not on the same page, it can cause a resentment when different challenges come up. But when we give ourselves the space to get on the same page, I think it just helps us move forward in such a healthy direction, so that together we're going to look at those challenges instead of blaming someone else for bringing the challenges into our lives, if that makes sense. So I think I would say be intentional, ask to start a conversation, not a debate, and be honest as you can be about the why you want to, and then talk about the how, and the fears will come from those discussions.
So good. I think our listeners have taken away just yes, you're normal. Fears are normal, and it's just part of life. You don't have to be ashamed of them. And Joy, you've given us great ways to broach that conversation with our own families, within ourselves. And so I want to thank you, because you shared some of your own personal story as well. And I think that that's such an encouragement to help people kind of peek in and understand kind of what they're signing up for, but also how to have the tools to navigate through it. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I love talking about foster care and adoption. So I'm thrilled to now be a follower of your podcast and get more information and share more information.
As a listener of the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast, you are helping raise awareness about foster care adoption and the 115,000 adoptable children in the United States. By leaving a review, subscribing, sharing, and talking about this podcast, you can help children and sibling groups find their forever family. If you'd like more information on adopting a child or sibling group through the foster care system, please visit my website, forgottenadoptionoption.com. There you will find how you can get started and even order a copy of my book for adults, The Forgotten Adoption Option, which will guide you through the entire process. You can also find my book for children of all ages, Are You a Forever Family? My books are available in paperback, audio, and ebook formats, and they might even be available at your local library. I welcome you to reach out to me with questions, comments, and your own adoption story. I would love to hear from you if you're signing up for licensing classes or to hear where you are in the foster care adoption process. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for Marcy Bursack. I really appreciate you tuning in, caring, and sharing, because every child deserves a family.